You were 8 years old when you learned to read the room, not in the way children normally do, with curiosity and wonder, but with survival instinct. You learned to detect the shift in your parents' mood before they walked through the door. You learned to smooth over tension between adults. You learned to make yourself small when things were chaotic and responsible when things were falling apart. While other kids were playing, you were meditating. While they were being comforted, you were comforting. While they were allowed to be children, you were already an adult. And nobody called it what it was. Nobody said you're carrying too much. Nobody intervened. So you just kept going. You became the reliable one, the mature one, the one everyone could count on. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that you were supposed to be a child. Now you're an adult, and people call you responsible, independent, wise beyond your years. But inside, there's a part of you that's exhausted, a part that never got to rest, a part that's been working since childhood and doesn't know how to stop. Today, we're going to name what happened to you. It's called parentification, and it's not a badge of honor. It's a wound, a specific kind of trauma that nobody talks about because it doesn't look like trauma from the outside. It looks like maturity. But you know the truth, and it's time we unpack it. The role reversal that stole your childhood. Parentification is what happens when a child is forced to function as a parent to their own parents or to their siblings. It's a role reversal where the natural order of caregiving gets flipped, and it happens in two forms. The first is emotional parentification. This is when you become your parents' emotional support system. When they vented to you about adult problems, when you have to manage their feelings, calm them down, or be their therapist. When you learned that your job was to keep them stable. The second is instrumental parentification. This is when you took on adult responsibilities: cooking, cleaning, taking care of younger siblings, managing bills, making sure everyone got to school on time. Maybe your parent was struggling with addiction, mental illness, or just emotional immaturity. Maybe they were physically present but emotionally absent. Or maybe they were overwhelmed by life and you naturally stepped in to fill the gap. Whatever the specifics, the pattern is the same. You had to grow up too fast because the adults in your life couldn't or wouldn't show up. And here's what nobody told you. You didn't become mature. You became hyper-responsible as a survival mechanism. There's a difference. Maturity comes from healthy development. Hyper-responsibility comes from necessity, from a nervous system that learned, if I don't handle this, everything falls apart. And that wiring doesn't just disappear when you turn 18. It follows you into every relationship, every job, every area of your adult life. The invisible grief. What makes parentification so insidious is that it doesn't register as trauma. There was no obvious abuse, no screaming, no violence. From the outside, you might have even looked like the perfect child. Responsible, helpful, mature. People probably praised you for it. Look how well they're handling everything. Look how grown up they are. But inside, something else was happening. You were grieving a childhood you never got to have. Psychologists call this ambiguous loss. It's the grief of something that was taken from you without anyone acknowledging it was taken. You never got to be carefree. You never got to make mistakes without feeling like the consequences would destroy everyone. You never got to be the center of attention in a healthy way, where your needs mattered just because you were a child. Instead, you learned that your value was conditional, that you mattered only when you were useful, only when you were solving problems, only when you were taking care of others. And now, as an adult, you're still operating from that belief. You struggle to receive help because you've never seen yourself as someone worthy of being cared for. You feel guilty when you're not productive. You can't relax because some part of you is still waiting for the next crisis you'll need to manage. And you're exhausted, not just tired, soul-deep exhausted, because you've been running on survival mode since you were a child. And nobody ever told you it was okay to stop the hyperindependence trap. Here's one of the most damaging legacies of parentification: hyperindependence. You learned early that relying on others is dangerous, that adults are unpredictable, that the only person you can truly count on is yourself. So you've built walls. You became self-sufficient to a degree that looks impressive but feels isolating. You don't ask for help. You don't share your struggles. You don't let people see when you're falling apart, because vulnerability was never safe for you. When you were vulnerable as a child, nobody caught you. Or worse, your vulnerability became another burden for the adults who were supposed to protect you. So you learned to catch yourself, to be your own parent. And now, Even when you're surrounded by people who genuinely want to support you, you can't let them in. There's a wall between you and intimacy. Not because you don't want a connection, but because your nervous system learned that connection means responsibility, that if you let someone close, you'll end up taking care of them. Or they'll need something from you that you don't have the capacity to give. Psychologists call this counterdependency, and it's the opposite extreme of unhealthy dependence. You're so independent that you've isolated yourself. You've become so good at not needing anyone that you've forgotten how to let yourself be human, how to be imperfect, how to need support without feeling weak. The guilt that never stops. If you experienced parentification, there's a specific kind of guilt that's probably followed you your whole life. It's the guilt of prioritizing yourself, of saying no, of not being available, of resting when you think you should be doing something. This guilt has a source. When you were a child and you tried to be a child, when you played instead of helped, or when you asked for something instead of giving, you probably felt the disapproval. Maybe it was subtle, a sigh, a comment about how you're being selfish, or maybe it was direct. You were told to stop being a burden, to think about others for once, and you internalized that message. My needs are a burden. Taking care of myself is selfish. Rest is only earned after I've taken care of everyone else. That guilt is still running your life. You feel guilty for taking a day off, for spending money on yourself, for setting boundaries with people who take advantage of your caretaking. You feel guilty for not answering every text immediately, for not solving everyone's problems, for being human and having limits. And here's the cruelest part. The people who benefited from your parentification probably don't even see it. They still expect you to be the reliable one, the helper, the strong one who never needs anything. And when you try to change that dynamic, when you try to set boundaries or prioritize yourself, they call you selfish. They accuse you of changing, of not being yourself. But you're not changing. You're finally trying to become who you were never allowed to be, someone whose needs matter to dot the relationship patterns you can't escape. Parentification doesn't just affect your relationship with yourself, it affects every relationship you have. Because you learned a very specific template for connection, your role is to give, to fix, to manage, and you unconsciously seek out relationships that confirm that template. You attract people who need you, who have problems you can solve, who are emotionally unstable or practically incompetent. And you don't see this as a red flag. You see it as familiar, as proof that you're valuable, because your worth has always been tied to how much you can do for others. Psychologists call this repetition compulsion. You're unconsciously recreating the dynamic from childhood, hoping that this time it will end differently. But this time, if you give enough, if you're helpful enough, if you're indispensable enough, you'll finally be valued for who you are instead of what you do. But it never works. Because people who are drawn to you because of what you can provide aren't capable of seeing you beyond that role. And the relationships that could be healthy, the ones with people who want to give as much as they take, those feel uncomfortable. They feel boring, like something's missing. What's missing is the familiar crisis, the chaos you learned to navigate. The role of caretaker that's been your identity for so long, you don't know who you are without it. The path to reparenting yourself. So how do you heal from this? How do you undo decades of conditioning that taught you your needs don't matter? The first step is grieving. You need to acknowledge what was taken from you. You didn't get a childhood where you were protected, where your only job was to learn and grow and play. That's a real loss, and it deserves to be mourned. Give yourself permission to feel angry, to feel sad, to recognize that what happened to you wasn't fair and it wasn't your fault. The second step is reparenting yourself. This means consciously giving yourself what you didn't get as a child. Permission to rest without earning it. Permission to have needs. Permission to be imperfect and still worthy of care. It means catching the voice in your head that says you're being selfish and asking, is that true? Or is that the message I was taught? The third step is setting boundaries with the people who still expect you to play the caretaker role. This is the hardest part because they will resist. They will guilt you. They will say, you've changed. And you have. You're finally prioritizing yourself. And that's not selfishness. That's survival. You can't keep giving from an empty cup. You can't keep being everyone's parent while neglecting the child inside. You who still needs care, the child who deserved better. Here's what I need you to understand. You were not born responsible. You were not born mature beyond your years. You were born deserving of protection, of care, of the space to be messy and needy and imperfect, and that was taken from you. Not through malice necessarily, but through circumstances that forced you into a role you should never have had to play. And now you're carrying the weight of that role into your adult life, wondering why you can't relax, why you can't let people in, why you feel guilty every time you prioritize yourself. It's because you never learned that you mattered outside of your usefulness. But you do. You matter because you exist. Not because of what you do, not because of how much you give, not because of how many people need you. You matter simply because you're here. And the version of you that's been working since childhood, the one that's been holding everything together, the one that never got to rest. That version deserves to finally put the weight down, to stop managing everyone else's emotions, to stop solving everyone else's problems, to stop being the adult in every room, and finally, for the first time, be the child who just gets to exist. You can't get your childhood back, but you can give yourself the thing you needed then and still need now: permission to be cared for, permission to be imperfect, permission to need support without shame. That's not a weakness. That's healing. And it starts the moment you stop running from the truth of what happened and start honoring the child inside you who survived it. You did what you had to do, and now it's time to let yourself rest.